Okay, this is going to be a preliminary video, possibly in a series of videos about the subject of art, and so I guess that makes it a pilot. So anyway, I want to talk about a few different things. I used to be an artist. I'm not an artist anymore. I know that that might seem strange to a lot of people. They might think that either you are or you're not an artist. You don't start to become one at some point. You don't stop being one at another point. You just are. It's bullshit. I used to be an artist. I'm not anymore. But because I used to be, I have a lot of thoughts on art. I'd like to share them, and I'm going to try to do that. And I'm going to try as much as possible not to make this about me, although I might use some of my own works as examples to illustrate a point on the general subject of art itself. So, the type of art that I'd like to focus on is my area of expertise. So that's going to be visual arts. It's going to be two-dimensional arts such as drawings or paintings, with probably an emphasis on painting. And I'll explain why it's going to be an emphasis on painting in just a moment. I guess there's a few things that I'd really like to kind of emphasize and bring to your attention, just to kind of set a kind of a foundation for the subject. If you're going to talk about art, you really got to know what art is, and you got to, you know, if you're going to talk about anything, you got to know why are you talking about it. I mean, because why you're talking about something is going to have a huge impact on what you say about it. So, for example, if I want to talk to an audience to educate people on how to appreciate art, I would talk very differently than if I were going to talk to an audience of people who are interested in developing as artists. And I'm going to focus on the latter. Now, I happen to have the personal belief that artists do appreciate art. So if you happen to be a member of the former group, you would still benefit from these videos. But I want to explain also very shortly why that is. Why I'm putting the emphasis on the artist rather than just the non-artist who wants to learn a little bit about art. And it kind of goes like this. In every art history class that I've ever taken, you have an instructor standing in the front of the class, and their job is to tell you about art through the ages, and to kind of show you how it evolved, and how it started, how it got to where we are, and thereby kind of in that manner giving it a definition. Usually after the first, well, within the first class, you know, they go through kind of laying out the syllabus, introducing themselves as a professor, and trying to get to know some of the students so that they can interact with you on a more personable level, and kind of going through and introducing one by one and all this. Can you say anything about yourself, whatever, and your background, why you're taking this class, is it part of your major, or do you have an interest in art, or is it something else? And you know, if you have any questions specifically for them, that's an opportunity for you to ask that question. So they always ask me that question. I always ask them the same question, and that is, are you an artist? Much to my surprise, in every single instance that I've ever asked that question to any art historian who was a professor at a school that I attended, they have always answered that question consistently. No, I'm not an artist. I've studied art history, and that's why I teach it. I enjoy the subject, so I teach it. Well, they don't really like my response to that, because I didn't study art. I did it. Okay, but my attitudes about art are very different because of that. And my response to that type of an answer is, if you've never done art, then how can you explain it to me? How can you explain it to me? Do you think because you read a book that you understand art? And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because of this video itself, which is very much the same thing. You are a viewer, and I'm talking to you about art, and theoretically you're going to learn a little bit about art as a consequence of what I may contribute to that conversation. But that doesn't mean that you will ever understand art unless you do art, unless you make art. Okay? It doesn't matter what I say to you. It doesn't matter if you understood what I said. It doesn't matter if you agree or disagree on a theoretical basis. None of that matters. If you don't make art, then you will never understand it. Even if you do make art and you think that all of my opinions about art are, out of phase with yours, that's fine. You will have a better understanding than somebody who has never made art or made an attempt to make art, who has simply watched these videos or read a book or sat in a lecture. And so I kind of wanted to begin with that because it's very important to understand that concept. So next, I want to kind of explore a few other issues. And unfortunately, the reason why this is a pilot video is because even though the purpose of these videos is to educate you on art, there's a lot of preliminary matters that kind of need to be dealt with before you can even start to do that. And one of them, as I've already mentioned, is, well, what is art? You got to define it. You got to give it. You got to know what this thing is that you're talking about. I mean, if you don't know what it is, how are you going to make it? That's pretty obvious, right? And if you are going to make it, then you'll also have to ask yourself another question, which we are not going to deal with now, and we will deal with much later, which is, why are you doing it? Why are you making it? Okay, and there's the reason why we're not going to deal with that question right now is because I don't want that answer to distract you from the first question, which is, what is art? I don't want you to be focused on, does this matter, when I'm trying to explain to you what this is. Okay, that makes sense, right? I mean, doesn't it make sense that you need to know what this is before we can even explore the question, does it matter? Okay, so that's why we're doing it that way. So again, like I said, there's some preliminary issues that I need to deal with before I can actually get into the meat of art itself, which is the purpose of these videos. And one of those things is human perception. So, for example, art takes on many forms. And I said that I would prioritize a very subset of those forms because those are the ones that I have got the most intimate knowledge of. But of course, it extends well beyond those. But for example, if you went into a museum, you would see things like paintings, drawings, you'd see things like furniture, you'd see sculpture, you'd see pottery, amongst other things. And in some instances, you'll even see in a museum architecture, because architecture certainly falls into the realm of art. And also, but not in a museum, music clearly falls into the realm of art. Dance falls into the realm of art. It's not going to be found in a museum. But these are all these different types of art forms, which, are open territory for the exploration to defining, well, what is art? When you say art, what do you mean when you say art? Okay, so we're going to go into that, and in order to go into that, we need to start with human perception, because art is something that is extraordinarily human. It is extraordinarily integrated into the human experience. For example, you take architecture. Architecture is a very utilitarian art. It deals with things like structures. It's not just simple, fancy design elements of structure. It's, it deals with things like the integrity of the structure. So, for example, if you are an architect, you need to know about building materials, and you need to know about the geometry of how you put those materials together in a way that it lends itself to the structural integrity of the structure you're building. So you learn about things like how shapes and gravity and the strengths of the materials all lend themselves to achieving a goal, an objective. So in a utilitarian art, such as architecture, it's almost much clearer what you're doing there because it's utilitarian. When you get into something else like visual art, auditory art, or something like this, it's not so clear what it is. It still has a utilitarian function, just not in the same sense. We're not talking about how to construct walls We're not talking about how to put a roof over you to protect you or your property or whatever from the elements or predators or thieves. It's not utilitarian in that sense. It's not utilitarian in the sense that it makes more efficient something else that you're doing like technology does. But it is utilitarian in the sense that it directly lends itself to the human experience in the sense of, I guess, I don't want to say a psychological sense, but an emotional sense. So, for example, music certainly very obviously lends itself to human beings in an emotional way. It inspires and it educates. Certainly literature can be said to do the same thing. It educates you in a way that has an emotional impact. And that emotional impact is that human beings are sharing ideas with one another, which are expressing experiences, and because of our capacity to empathize and associate with those experiences, we can kind of string together a series of emotional responses, and therefore we can gain new insights into an experience we've never had. Maybe it's not even possible to have because it's pure fantasy. I don't mean just fiction, I mean fantasy. So, but it still serves a purpose because it opens up your eyes to an experience that you otherwise would not have had access to. Visual arts does the same thing. Okay, so visual arts, sometimes visual arts will display nature, sometimes it doesn't. So you have representative visual arts, you have abstract visual arts, as well as, dance is extremely abstract. So you start to see where I'm going with this, is that what each one of these different art forms, they're all art forms, okay, so there's some kind of commonality there. They all have, all these particularities to each one of them, which makes this one very different from that one, this one very different from that one, this one very different from that one. But there's a commonality to them, which is what makes us refer to all of them under the category of art. So we need to get to what is that, not only what is art, but when does it start? So, for example, when we deal with issues of pictorial arts, as I said, I would focus on, you've got children scrolling pictures. Is it art though? And if it is art, when did it become art? Because, you also got kids just scribbling on the page, and you got people who are scribbling with purpose, so some people are just literally coloring the sheet of paper, and other people are setting out to establish specified forms on the paper and to maybe tell a story, maybe this, maybe that, doesn't matter. But when do you say it starts becoming art? Does it start becoming art in the most primitive states, when it literally is just scribbling on the paper? Does it start to become art when they, we could get into the whole abortion, when does life begin question, right? Does it become art when they grab the sheet of paper? Really, you have to ask yourself this, and you have to have an answer for it, and that answer does not have to agree with my answer, does not have to agree with another artist's answer, but you do have to have an answer for yourself, and that's going to define if you're an artist, which is who I said I'm going to be talking to in this video. It's going to define what your theory of art is. And that's going to be very important, because if you are presenting your art, first question that any gallery is going to ask you before they can display your stuff, if they want to explain any of this stuff that they're displaying to patrons who are coming in looking for something to buy, they need to give them some kind of perspective on who you are as an artist. So they're going to ask you for an artist statement. And you're like, where am I going to come up with this? Well, you're going to come up with this out of your theory on art. And this is your theory on art. Your theory on art is your answers to these questions. So that's very important to understand. I'm not going to tell you how to write your artist statement. By the way, I think it's one of the stupidest things that ever existed in the whole business of art. That's a whole other matter. But I will take 5 seconds to explain why I think it's so ignorant, and that's this. If you paint pictures That's your mode of expression. You shouldn't ask someone whose mode of expression is visual to then reduce that to words as an artist statement. I mean, we don't ask musicians to do that. We don't ask, all this stuff. It's the dumbest thing that has ever happened. Basically, what it is this is the way I see it. Okay, because I've been dealing with this for a while. It's one of my major pet peeves. When a gallery turns to an artist and says, "We need an artist statement from you," which they will. They won't represent you in any respect without that. But what they're essentially doing is they're saying, we're too lazy to put forth any effort for the commission, which we're going to take off the top when we sell your stuff, if we do, which is a huge commission. It's usually like 50%. They don't want to actually put in any work for that 50%. You're putting your whole soul into it, okay? But they don't even want to take time to have a conversation with you like maybe, for example, an art reviewer would do. An art reviewer puts way more work into you than any gallery ever will. And you're paying, your work is paying for the gallery's lack of effort, whereas you're not doing anything to pay for the reviewer's effort. Actually, their publicist is. So their publisher is doing that. So I just think it's ridiculous. Anyway, so let's get past all that. Let's get back to the human element of art and why it's important and why is it preliminary to the discussion of art. In the visual arts, we're dealing with whether or not we are dealing with depiction of nature or abstraction doesn't make any difference on this matter. We are dealing with sight. That's what we're dealing with. All of our efforts in visual arts is to lend themselves to the faculty of sight. Therefore, it is very, 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 very important to understand the faculties of sight. And the same is true of music. In music, everything is being done for the faculty of hearing. It's very important to understand the dynamics of hearing to produce music and to be a musician. And this is why they teach you things like music theory. So let's talk about vision for a minute. When you paint something, yes, you are taking materials and binders, which basically material being, in this case, pigment, and binders being whatever medium that pigment is in, like oil or whatever, and you're attaching that to a surface, and it's going to fix it on that surface in a particular manner to create an image, a visual experience. And so we need to understand how visual experiences work and what they are. So it's a very important, and most artists don't do this, and most art educators don't talk about this. And this is primarily the reason why I am talking about it, is you need to understand human sight, and you need to understand how it is, what it is and how it works, and the limits of it. So when you're creating an image, whether you're creating an image on a canvas, a sheet of paper, or a computer monitor, you're dealing with light. Believe it or not, you're working with all kinds of other things that are not light so that you can deal with light. Okay? And you need to understand that when you're dealing with light, that visual experience, which is purely through the faculties of the eye, you have two types of sensory receptors. You have cones and you have rods. And both of these sensory receptors are sensitive to light. That's what I'm talking about. Okay? And because they're sensitive to light, that's what you're dealing with when you're depicting visual arts. You're dealing with light. There's two different types of light that you need to understand. There is direct light, meaning you're looking at light. And then there's reflected light, which means that there's light involved, but you're not looking at a light source. You are looking at light is bouncing off the surface of an object, for example, or your depiction of an object, and reflecting back to you, even if it's abstract art. Okay, and this is very, very, very important. When you're doing a drawing or a painting, you're dealing with reflective light. You're dealing with light hitting the surface of your painting or your paper and bouncing off of that into the viewer's eye. And the whole experience comes as a result of that. When you're dealing with a computer monitor or something like that, you are dealing with direct light. If you're dealing with a television monitor, same thing. You're dealing with direct light. The image is light being projected out at your eye. And the way that that works is very different. It's in the first instance, it's called subtractive, and in the second instance, it's called additive. And what that means is this. When you look at, for example, I'm going to turn this view around. Where is, I don't know, okay, maybe I'm not. So if you're looking at this door, okay, and say by your definition this is red. I have a little bit more discerning eye because I've been working in art for a long time. I wouldn't call this red, but let's say you do. How did you get to see red here? Well, here's what actually happened. Light, the full spectrum of light, struck this door, bounced off. Some of it bounced off, some of it didn't bounce off. Okay, the pigment, which is the paint here, caused some of the light to bounce off, and some of it didn't get bounced off. That light went into the door, and however much light goes into an object, it's transferred into heat, and so when it bounces off, you see it as light. So we're seeing a reflection of red from this surface, so we call this surface red. Now, what that means is that the opposite of red, which is green, was absorbed into the surface. It didn't bounce off. Okay, it wasn't reflected. If we were looking at green, it means red was absorbed into the surface and green light bounced off. Okay, that's very important. That's called subtractive. That means what we are seeing is a result of what's left over after the rest of it's been subtracted by the surface, by the pigment here. Okay. Now, if this was light, it'd be very different. So, if we add two colors, and if we add all the primary colors in light, we'd get white. We'd see white. In other words, it wouldn't subtract anything. We'd see all the color. In other words, if you give me all the color, I will see all the color. And when you are looking at all the color, what you are perceiving is the color white. So I want to get a little bit more into that, okay? Because when you add two colors, okay, I'm going to stop here because I want to organize this in a different way.